Well, hello, and welcome to episode 40 of It's Never Sunny in Seattle, a Seattle Mariners podcast. I'm your host today, Evan James, joined by Michael Ahedo and Anders Jorstad. The MLB lockout continues through the league, and the Players Union met on Tuesday as the sides continue to work towards a deal. Twitter rumors abound that the meeting was pretty heated, and while it does appear some kind of progress is being made in terms of the raw details, the process remains tense and concessions are made and lines are drawn in the sand. The latest is that the MLB will be submitting a new proposal on Saturday, but it feels like we're getting pretty late for spring training to start on time. Durs, I want to kick it over to you first. What did you think of those comments Rob Manfred made yesterday about baseball and the kind of investment it is for the owners?
So he was alluding to the fact that investing and owning a baseball team is more risky than investing in stocks, which is just really quite funny. If that was true, then people would not be chomping at the bit to be owners of Major League Baseball teams the way they are. I don't know if in recent memory anybody has ever sold a baseball team at a loss. I mean, even the franchises that aren't any good sell at pretty substantial profit margins for the people that are selling the franchise. So, I think that's pretty clearly just bullshit from Manfred, but he's going to say what he thinks is going to help the owners, I suppose.
And I was listening to that quote and realizing that so MLB has grown 365% over the last 10 years. That's a 36.5% return. I don't know anyone that does that in the market, and I don't know a ton of financial types, but I would have to believe that a 30% return is pretty darn good for anything at any point. So it sounds like a lie just at face value. I also think it doesn't actually prove what he thinks it means. When he says he didn't get the same rate of return as he would have in the stock market, that's indicative that those people shouldn't own a baseball team more than we should share more of our money with them. Is kind of what that indicates to me. I don't know how you feel about that, Mikey.
I don't know. It's just typical stuff. It's like the audacity to what's it? A bold-faced lie? Is that what the kids say? And not even really the kids, the boomers. To just lie to everyone's faces. Like no one thinks that's true. I don't think you could find anyone who you could say that it's riskier to own it. What did he say? It's riskier or whatever.
They made a worse return in the stock, or they made a worse return for baseball than they would have investing the same money in the stock market, which is
that's
nonsensical.
So vague too. Yeah, bull fucking shit. I don't know. I don't have anything particularly, compelling to add other than, it's just clearly not true. I am encouraged, in general that they have made concessions with the universal DH. And there was one other thing.
They no longer are going to be giving draft pick compensation for teams that sign qualified free agents. Free agents that reject the qualifying offer will no longer, they won't have to sacrifice draft picks for those players anymore. Which I don't know what that means for the Mariners. I think someone at Look at Lenny was asking this question. Like, do they still have to give up a pick for Robbie Ray now? I don't know.
Yeah, because they signed him under the last agreement, and then in the new agreement they wouldn't have to. So that is an interesting question. So it could benefit the team.
They'll have to give it up because that happened under the the old CBA is my thinking. Also, you'll notice both of those things are not core financial issues between the MLB and PA. Ew, I just said the MLB.
The baseball, just the baseball itself.
Yeah. But I'm still a little bit more, optimistic about the two reaching an agreement because, I don't know, just that Manfred actually came forward and, made some concessions, quote unquote concessions. Like I doubt they care about the DH. The second one, the draft compensation is something, but it's not, it's not going to affect owners in terms of like tens of millions of dollars every year, which the other, issues are going to. So they conceded on the easiest things, and as far as I'm concerned, I think it's something of a it's kind of just like to curry the favor, I guess, of the public, to it's a PR war, so it seems like the players have been doing a pretty good job of it lately. It seems like they're trying to kind of get some of that back here. So,
Well, let's talk about that because there's a particular Mariners relief pitcher who is particularly outspoken on this issue and has really kind of been lighting up the Twitter sphere.
Who would that be, Evan?
I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone on this podcast, but it's going to be Mr. Paul Sewald. Well, Mikey, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit. You have a closer relationship to Paul, obviously, than Andrews or I do. Kind of about what his stance is and his pro labor beliefs and how he's been extolling that for the fans.
Yeah. So someone from the union, it's like UFC W21. It's a local union in Seattle. And they're the largest private sector union in Washington. They have, tens of thousands of members, but they're all grocery store workers, retail workers, healthcare workers, etc. And someone who works for them or something like that, he must, work for them. He reached out to me and he was like, "Yo, just wanted to reach out." And he was basically like, I know that you have a relationship with Paul. And based on like that and your politics, I think it would be really great. We are trying to organize the retail workers in T-Mobile Park, get them unionized, get them, treated fairly. We think it would matter a great deal if we got a player quote. So I sent it over to Paul, and he was essentially like, I need to check with my agent, but this is, it's equivalent to what we're dealing with. And also like, I won't say too much, but players don't love owners. And so, yeah, I had him get into contact with that other guy. He reached out and was like, "Yo, Paul, Paul hit me up, whatever." And then this morning he was like, "Yo, we're about to put something out today." So Paul Sewald tweeted, and I'll pull it up, but it's something along the lines of, these, the games wouldn't run the same way without these retail workers. So that the actual quote is, "As a member of MLBPA in a fight of unionization, I share solidarity with retail workers fighting to better their working conditions. Our games wouldn't run smoothly without your efforts and labor. You're necessary to the fan experience, and you deserve to be well compensated and fairly treated." Somewhat neutral, not neutral, but like he's not saying like fuck the owners or like fuck Rob Manfred, even if he might think it. But it is pretty unprecedented for a player while he's playing to kind of go on the record and speak out and support, especially of some workers who work in MLB stadiums. So, he tweeted that, and everyone, I mean, everyone loves Paul Sewald, and Paul Sewald obviously loves the people. So it's kind of blown up. He's got 3,000 likes, over 100 quote tweets, over 400 retweets. And it's super cool. Like it shouldn't really be lost in this, but it's super fucking cool for a player to do something like this. So as as a pal, I suppose, of Paul Sewald, I'm proud of him. It's
I
rad.
think, I think this is like it's a good opportunity for the union to jump on something like this, given where the players currently are. I think they know that the players are kind of at maximum fed upness with the with the owner, so to speak, and that this is like the perfect opportunity to do something like that if they were going to. Um, I I do think it was interesting how Jeff Passan in his article that he published today being Friday, an ESPN Plus story, he mentioned like the radicalization of players toward being pro labor, and it's really fascinating how we're like seeing this before our eyes, like players becoming extraordinarily pro labor. It seems. Um, and as with all things, I think it just takes someone to be in that situation to really realize, oh, this is messed up, and other people are dealing with things that are messed up too. I know that some people have kind of had trouble relating to the player specifically, and Evan, I want you to tell the people what you said about that yesterday, because I know that you you listen to a lot of Seattle sports talk radio, and so you are so you are unfortunately exposed to a lot of bad takes, but you had an interesting thought on why those people are coming from a certain place, and I want you to share it.
Well, I've been listening to the radio really all week, and they've been talking about this labor dispute for a month, but it has heated up quite a bit as the news has kind of ebbed and flowed over the past, especially like 10 days. Now that we know kind of for sure that spring training is going to be delayed, probably to some degree. And the kind of the disappointment around the fact that this is not resolved is starting to crystallize in a way that I don't think it had earlier this year or late last year. And people are a little frustrated. They're frustrated because life is hard right now and baseball is fun. And this is the second time in 3 seasons. MLB is not coming at a time of need for people and is blowing it in terms of, having its shit together, frankly. But I'm empathetic because when I heard a lot of those calls into the radio, be it the Mike Salk show or, Jake and Stacy, and people are saying things like, I would take $500,000 and, be happy with it, or I'd take $1 million and be happy with it. That's true, and they are correct about that from their own perspective. And I empathize because what they're really saying is I'm not able to empathize with players in their situation because I don't have enough for me. And it isn't really about Paul Sewald or, like I made the comparison to like an Elvis Alvarado type, like somebody who's in the low minors and kind of how it affects them. They're not thinking about those people. They're thinking about what $1 million is to them. And there is a different context here because if the question on the table was, okay, so we're not going to give the owners any more money, we're not going to give the players any more money, but all the revenue is going to go to teacher salaries or, to some kind of pro union cause. If that was on the table, I'd have that discussion, and I think a lot of people would, but it isn't. The question is how we're going to share the money baseball generates with the people who participate in baseball as a sport, and whether or not we think it's fair that the owners get to decide they keep more because they're mildly unhappy with their rate of return relative to the stock market. I guess it's real sad. Um, yeah, but I'm empathetic, and I guess what I would say, and kind of the point I made yesterday, is that I feel bad for people, and if you're in a position where you can't empathize with the players, it's because you don't feel like you have enough for yourself, and I hope that people who are struggling do better. I do. I don't want to be angry at anyone. And I heard, grocery store workers and truckers and people who work hard and work real jobs, kind of struggle with that empathy, and we want better for them as well, is what I would say. As a podcast, like that's our whole philosophy. We want better for everyone. We're a bunch of dirty socialists. So I say that tongue in cheek, but yeah, like we want people to do well no matter what they're doing. And this is an interesting discussion because there's an intersection of a socio-political moment in American history, in pro sports, and in baseball specifically. So there are layers to how we have to approach this and kind of the nuance to it. And I think that factors into how you see Paul Sewald reacting to it. That players do feel kind of empowered and emboldened to take some of that power back the way that workers have, over the last year or so as well, to some effect, obviously. Um, and that's really cool. Do you guys have anything to add to that discussion?
Yeah. I mean, this isn't a battle of millionaires and billionaires. That's kind of that's an owner's, Republican kind of talking point, I think. Um, I mean, let's see. So the median income of players 1.1 million. So if that's like the middle, there's a lot of people who are making less than $1 million, and I know that's a lot of money, but also it's just kind of silly because under capitalism, everyone gets exploited, but this exploitation is happening on a much larger scale. MLB owners are raking in more, much more relative to I guess other settings, and also we're can I say we're because I'm pro labor. The players are not they're not fighting for, I don't know, Max Scherzer. They're fighting for, I mean, Paul Sewald says it here. Someone asked, like, I don't know what the players are looking for. What are your asks? And Paul Sewald says, increase salaries for 0 to 3 year players on the minimum salary, which makes a ton of sense. Those players don't make millions. More competitive integrity, so no tanking, and ending service time manipulation. Um, these are all very, very reasonable, and if you can't get behind them, kind of makes you think. So yeah, I do find the framing interesting sometimes because it to me is so disingenuous.
Yeah, and for a fan, this really should matter because even though like fans think this is so nebulous and doesn't affect their enjoyment of the game, it really does. Surface time manipulation should matter a good deal to fans because that affects how long it takes for you to see some of your team's favorite young players. Who knows how much sooner Wander Franco would have been up if you're a Rays fan, or who knows how much sooner Julio Rodriguez would have been up if you're a Mariners fan. Or Jared Kellnick. I mean, the list goes on and on. But also like for those small market teams, especially, I'm sure Rays fans and A's fans and Pirates fans are sick, and Mariners fans to some extent are sick of their team crying poor and saying we don't have the ability to spend with the big dogs, with the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Red Sox. And revenue sharing is a way to fix that. If the Yankees are raking in much more revenue, if they share some of their revenue with the A's, and all of a sudden A's fans can be more excited because they have a chance to go after these big ticket free agents. Um, and the Mariners, who are kind of like they're kind of like upper middle class in baseball, but they act like the lower middle class.
Very
I
much
mean, there
so.
needs to be changes there too. I know that like a lot of the like ESPN old hat analyst types don't really usually have good takes. I actually think that Jason Stark had a really good take on a way to like solve tanking, and that was I know you guys have probably heard this one, but the team that has the best record that doesn't make the playoffs should get the first pick, and it should be in descending order from there, which would encourage teams to play as hard as they can, because then the Blue Jays would have had the number one pick. So even though they missed the playoffs by just a little bit, they get rewarded for trying to win. And then the Mariners would have the second pick, and it would have gone all the way down. So the worst team would have had like the 21st pick or something, and then you'd have the playoff teams after them. I think that's never going to be adopted. The owners would never in a million years accept that. But like that's the kind of things that we need. And those are things that like will make baseball a more exciting sport, especially if you're a fan of a franchise like the Mariners, who just like seemingly make every excuse in the book to not spend money.
Agreed. I think all of that's really, really salient, and it's just kind of it's a really encompassing discussion. A lot of what we're talking about, be it the labor side of it, the player side of it. Paul Sewald is talking about unionizing the people who work at the stadium. A thing that none of us mentioned is that Mariners pay employees pretty poorly. A lot of people who work concessions or they're essentially seasonal laborers, and they are temp, and they work not full shifts, and they work them at weird hours. So like it's kind of hard to have a second job working Safeco Field if your shifts are 5 hours and they're like 3 to 8, or like 6 to 11 or something. It's just they're not that accommodating for people, and there are tons of ways in which we can make this better, both from a competitive standpoint and from a standpoint of taking care of the people who are involved in the game. And I think all of that's really important. And that's if you want a reason to be patient with everything that's going on, what you can hope is that something good comes out of this. Whether or not that's likely is a separate discussion, but they're at least going to try. And I'm encouraged to see the players trying as much as they are and not caving, because it would, for many of them, it is easy not to care because they're already well off. And we've heard some of that dissenting opinion this week as well. So it is what it is. But do you guys want to move on to talk about the Mariners bullpen?
I do want to say one last thing before I move on, which is that I know that Saturday the owners are making a new proposal to the players. I will say I know Manfred said it's going to be a quote good deal or a good offer. I'm not really that optimistic that like a week after they called for a mediator, they're suddenly going to turn around and have an offer that's legitimately good for the players.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to like temper my expectations because of that. I think that it's probably going to be more of like a PR offer where they get closer on some things that don't really matter, like we mentioned before with the DH and with the qualifying offer stuff, and then say, "Hey, look, we moved. Now players' turn to move." So I'm hopeful that it's better than that, but that's just kind of what I'm expecting. But I guess we'll see.
I agree. I think they'll budge on, like you said, those things, and then it'll be kind of like an arbitrary discussion where they say we did two things. We did two of your things. Now you're going to do two of our things. Not making the connection publicly with everyone that the honest truth is those two things don't have anything to do with the money for the most part. Those are like instituting a universal DH. There isn't any money involved in that. Like, what is the most expensive DH makes what 20 million and still plays first base, and it's like there's no financial element to either of those decisions. So they are giving something the players want, but it's not something for which there is necessarily monetary value attached, and they are trying to clutch the pearls on the money. So that's the angle we're dealing with. Yeah. Well, we got a question on Twitter. For the Lookout Landing podcast, I believe, but I liked it enough where I wanted us to talk about it here. And it was the Zips projections are not favorable to the Mariners at all. They don't like the Mariners hitters. They especially don't like the Mariners bullpen when compared to last season. And the question was why, kind of like what is the projection missing that we know, or why doesn't it like these guys? And I think there are short and long answers to that. And I'll start with the short answer, which is that a lot of the players who were really good in the Mariners bullpen last year, in particular Paul Sewald, and to a lesser degree Second Rider and Sadler, just don't have track records of being that good for any length of time. In Paul Sewald's case, it's the best he's ever been. Second Rider's case, he's been good before, but he was injured in between, so it doesn't trust him to stay healthy. And Sadler has never been better, and also pitched like, didn't he pitch like 21, 27 innings, something like that, without giving up a run, something weird. That's kind of an anomaly. Like, even if he's really good, it's unlikely he's going to pitch a 0 ERA for months at a time. But that's kind of like the 1,000-foot view. I wanted to pitch it over to Mikey and maybe give us some more specifics. Why don't we start with Paul, because obviously Paul is the star.
Yeah, I mean, let me like pull up his numbers and kind of compare them to his projections. I am wholly unsurprised. I don't think it's going to believe in the K percentage, which was 39.4 last year, and depends on what you want. Like Steamer's historically been a pooper. Like Steamer is a Debbie Downer. Steamer literally thinks he's going to be exactly 10% lower, which I find hard to believe. ATC in the bat, which are generally pretty good, like average out to 33%, which I could see. But also, aside from getting more looks at Paul Sewald, unless he loses, a ton of velo or he raises his arm slot, and relievers are volatile, so that's baked into the system. I don't see any reason why he would. You can't really fake a 30% strikeout minus walk rate. That's super legit. And if you just take his swinging strike percentage, which, oh boy, where is it? I often use it as kind of a frame of reference for if you double it, you get a player's K percentage, and if you double it, it's like 32%. So that's about where the projections are. The thing is, I believe in his ability to also get called strikes. Um, so I think the bugaboo for him is really home runs. I'm not worried about the walks. I think he would be hard pressed to repeat that strikeout rate. But aside from that, like if he posts a 25% K minus walk percentage, that's pretty good. So the thing is, with all these guys, they were all very, very good last year. They're probably going to regress, but that's only because what they did is hard to accomplish. I find Casey Sadler in particular very interesting because in terms of non-Magnus movement, which means a lot of guys create movement with Magnus. So if you think about like a Garrett Cole fastball, it's because it's backspin that's propelling the ball up and preventing it from falling. There are other ways to create deceptive movement. And the most, kind of en vogue is seam shifted wake. And I'm writing about this right now, but the thing about seam shifted wake is just because the and if you can see me on video, I'm using my hand, but just because the axis deviation, shows that like when it's released, it's at 12 on a clock, and when it reaches the plate, it's at 1:30. That doesn't mean that it's actually changing its movement that much, especially if it has a lot of gyro movement, which is non-active spin or inactive spin. So that was a very long way of saying some of these guys are deceptive. Casey Sadler adds extra drop on his curveball, another like couple extra inches. And on a sinker, he adds several inches, like 3 inches of horizontal movement. So Sadler's a deceptive guy. Second rider, I remember seeing a pitch that I was just shocked about, and I'm not seeing it right now, but I think second rider has some weird stuff going on with his pitches too. Maybe I was looking at like Stuff Plus or something, but I've historically thought, he's going to tank big time. And maybe while, one of you kind of, we hear your thoughts on my thoughts, all pulled up. But yeah, I've historically been kind of down on him, and I saw something that made me more optimistic.
Durs.
What I wanted to say overall about these guys, and I think this maybe is one of the reasons why Zips is down on them, but it's hard to know, is I'm concerned about what they're going to look like next year after such a big load that they had to carry last year. This is kind of what happened to Edwin Diaz, right? He threw like every other game for the Mariners, and then they traded him to the Mets, and the next year he was like atrocious. I know that there's some data backing up the fact that when pitchers are overtaxed one year, especially relievers, they're likely to regress heavily the following year. So I wonder if there's some of that being baked into these projections, and that kind of makes me think that maybe the Mariners should consider doing what they did with Diaz, where they capitalize on a guy's strong season and you trade him or you put him in a trade package.
Who are you
Like
talking
maybe
about?
Sadler. Sorry?
Who are you talking about?
Well, obviously not Paul Sewald.
Right.
But for the other guys, I kind of wonder if they wouldn't package them in a deal for like a Matt Chapman or a Sonny Gray or whoever they end up trading for once the lockout ends. I think that might be a shrewd move, and that's kind of what they did with Chargois to an extent. They packaged him in a deal and got Castillo out of it. So that the Mariners can kind of reload the bullpen with new guys who they can then try to get strong seasons out of.
Yeah.
For the record, I've
Also-
long thought Steckenrider is the most likely Mariner to get traded on the current roster. just because of his utility purpose and the fact that he's not as good as Sewald and he's replaceable by Sadler. He just sort of, to me, feels like a natural guy to be in a trade. So I agree with Durs on that.
Yeah, it just feels like with all sorry, Mikey. It just feels like with all the guys they have, and they have Munoz and Giles coming in already, plus potentially, in a full season of Castillo, and possibly other guys they're going to go out and get, and maybe like if Justin Dunn turns into a reliever, or if Matt Brash turns into a reliever, they just have a very like packed together bullpen, and a couple of those guys have to get squeezed out somehow.
One thing that I was going to say is that Steamer in particular, and I think this is why it really doesn't like Paul Sewald, has velo built into the model. So like, it always hates Kyle Hendricks, and it's because Kyle Hendricks throws it like 80. And I'm gonna I'm looking at Drew Seckenrider, and Stuff Plus likes his fastball, which surprises me a little bit. And he just locates everything. I think that's kind of the thing. He locates everything, and everything is pretty average in terms of stuff, which, if you can put your stuff where you want, that's pretty good. The other thing is that I'm gonna do a feature interaction with his velo and vertical movement on his fastball. I think Stuff Plus probably likes his fastball because he has like a 19 IVB, which is pretty high. Yeah. So where he's at, like, man, if he threw any harder, his fastball would be pretty crazy. So I think that's really why it likes his fastball. When you throw from a higher arm slot, it's kind of hard to. You have to have plus ride, and I think in this case he does, because he spins the ball really well. But it's just funny. He doesn't have a 30% CSW pitch, which generally means you're not that great. But he was. I don't know if see if he's a pop up guy. He was. So that's it. That is how Drew Seckenrider is so good. Is his fastball 14% of batted balls are pop-ups, which is pretty high.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So, and that makes sense because he throws at the top of the zone and he has plus ride. He locates well and has like a decent curveball. So that's my Drew Seckenrider positive propaganda for the day.
I think on the whole, it's likely that the Mariners bullpen is not as good as they were last year. I want to say they were top 5 last year. It's entirely feasible that all these guys come back are more or less as good as they were last year, and the overall performance just isn't quite there. Don't forget too that like we replaced Chargois with Castillo, but Chargois pitched really well for the Mariners. Even if we're doing like a 1-to-1 swap there, it's not super likely Castillo is a major upgrade over what we got from Chargois in that interim. Ditto, like if we were to get rid of Steckenrider and replace him with Ken Giles, Steckenrider was really good. It's, like there's only so much value a reliever can kind of accrue. And when they're as good as some of the guys were last year, there isn't all that much room for them to go, except down. Obviously, we believe in the talent here. We believe in, Paul Sewald's kind of strikeout rate and his pitchability. We believe that the improvements he made with the Mariners were sustainable. But there is some uncertainty built into it. I kind of think they're going to wind up being a top 10 bullpen, maybe. Yeah, like I think top 10 is a reasonable expectation, while not overrating them to the degree where I want to say top 5. Durs, how would you say that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, I think it's actually going to be very positive for the Mariners to especially get Andres Munoz in there. Because we haven't seen him pitch at all. I mean, he pitched a game at the end of the year last year.
I think he
And
had
Matt
2 hitters
Brash,
last year.
right? And Matt Brash, who maybe he's a starter, which would actually be better. Maybe he's a reliever, and if he's a reliever, he's probably gonna be a really freaking good reliever.
Mm-hmm.
So if you add those two guys to the bullpen, that I think replaces a lot of what would be regression because we expect those guys to both just be nails when they get to the bullpen. Of course, that that's not guaranteed. Munoz could have an okay first year with like a 4.28 ERA, and we're like, oh, he was decent, but he wasn't amazing. That's entirely possible, and that would obviously be a downgrade from whatever innings he was inheriting from the team last year.
Mm-hmm.
I have something of a counter. So one is, I really like strikeouts minus walk percentage. The Mariners did rank 7th in MLB in terms of relievers, but also you have guys like Steckenrider, you have guys like Sadler. I think another thing to think about is, so first of all, fun fact, who do we think pitched the most innings in the bullpen for the Mariners?
Last year,
Yeah.
Oh, in
Anthony
the bullpen?
Machevitz.
Yeah, I was gonna say Tony Sandwiches because he was with them all year. Everybody else got called up at
That's
a
right.
certain point.
That's why I thought
He's number
about it.
3.
He's
Oh,
number
okay.
3.
Wow. Was Sadler on the
No-
opening
no
day
cheating.
roster? I think he was.
But he was on the COVID list for a while. Am I right about that? Or was he on the paternity list?
I
Everyone had a
think
kid at some point.
He's top 5, but not.
That's true. The
Yeah.
Mariner
One's pretty
dads.
obvious. One in the top 2 is pretty obvious.
Is Steckenrider
So
one of the top 2? Number 2?
Steckenrider's number 1.
Oh,
Really? Really?
67 innings pitched, which I think kind of speaks to your point, Durs, where
yeah, get him out of here.
he also led the team in saves. He's
Mhm.
I love Sadler. I think he's super legit. Obviously not 0.67 ERA legit,
Mhm.
but he pitched 40 innings and Steck pitched 67. Steck is the unsung hero of the season.
Sadler was number 2, really?
Yeah. Oh wait, he was what?
Number 2. So it was Steckenrider and then Sadler as the
No,
number 1
Sadler's
and 2?
5. Sewald's
Okay.
2.
Okay.
I did
Okay.
not
is-
realize Sadler had a
which-
0.67 ERA. Wow.
He gave up 1 run all year, right? Like one, I believe it was 1
I
run.
think so. I mean, Sewald, that's insane that Sewald did that after getting called up in May.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the counter argument is getting Giles, Munoz, maybe Brash, maybe, I don't know. It depends on, what the starting situation is. Machevitz is gone, right?
No, I don't think
He
so.
still yeah, I believe he's still on the team.
I don't know that he's going to make the team. So Machevitz,
He has to. Who's the other
third in
lefty that
innings
they
pitched.
have?
Don't they still have
Signed Doolittle.
Margavicius as well somewheres?
Yeah.
Coming back from
See,
thoracic outlet syndrome?
Yeah.
See, I was talking about this. I think I talked about this with you guys like a couple weeks ago. Like, I think we're going to kind of regret giving up Ray Kerr in that deal for Adam Frazier, because other than Machevitz, who's a lefty in the bullpen right now that we trust? Even in the minors, like the high minors,
I don't
there's
know.
not
Do you
really anyone.
trust
Justice
Ray Kerr, though?
Sheffield.
I mean, no, but there's
Oh,
nobody
God.
else even behind them. Like Rowan Asilius.
Honestly, he's the likeliest candidate today.
I know.
I don't think you need a lefty. Like, I don't think you have to have a lefty. Just throw fucking Steck out there. Have him elevate his fucking fastball. I'm half kidding, but Machevitz.
I thought you were gonna say like make him throw with his left hand.
I mean, sure, that too. Machevitz
Is Johan a lefty?
No.
No,
He's basically
right.
Paul Sewald, though. In terms of,
I recall
things.
there was an article about this, as I recall.
This is true.
Does he have a little bit of Paul Sewald in him?
Can I make my point? Is that okay? Third in innings pitched, Machevitz. Fourth in innings pitched, Montero, who had a 7.27 ERA. Sixth in innings pitched, Will Vest.
Oh.
Like, none of those guys are back. Oh, also, Keenan Middleton was not great.
Oh my god.
That wasn't good.
I blocked these guys out of my memory. Will Vest, we were so high on that guy.
He didn't make it out of April, right? They
Yeah.
DFA'd him or returned him to the Tigers in relatively short order.
I was told good things about him. Anyways, I think it's going to help even it out by getting such an insanely actually good rotation or bullpen.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. And like Castillo didn't get to pitch a full season, and he also like wasn't right. So yeah, honestly, bring Doolittle back. His peripherals were good.
We have to
I kind of
guess
wonder
that
if the Mariners.
Go ahead,
I
Gersh.
kind of wonder if the. I kind of wonder if the Mariners like go out and get someone like a new reclamation project. I was like, what if they? I was looking at Red Skies. What if they go and get like Amir Garrett?
Yo, I would be into that. That could
He's a
happen
cool
if you
guy,
take
too.
on Moose. You know, could get a Garrett and a starter, but I feel like that'll cost you. Yeah. It depends. I mean, if you want to give Eric Swanson the heave ho, then I mean,
Oh, God.
sure. It's basically him and Mashevitz that are expendable in the bullpen. And if you think Steck's arm will fall off, which I don't necessarily, that's a thing too. But there's not much room to do so. I think they will take a flyer on, maybe a Sewald-esque guy. It's also worth considering now that when the Mariners do this, teams are going to be watching. So, yeah, I'm optimistic about the bullpen. I also was last year, and I was optimistic of guys like Key and Rafael Montero, but not this much.
Mm-hmm. There's three guys that are kind of a wild card in all of this, and those are Brash, Justin Dunn, and then Sheffield, because it's likely that one of them is in the bullpen, one of them is in the starting rotation, and one of them is in Tacoma. But it could virtually be any combination of those things, really.
If Dunn or Sheffield are in the starting rotation, I'm trying to think of something really bad I could do to myself. I don't know. I don't like speaking ill of players. It's kind of mean. But
yeah, I think that both of them start in Tacoma, and if like one of them starts like absolutely shoving, then maybe they come up if there's an injury, and maybe that opens the door for one of them. So like maybe if Justin Dunn like looks like, he's improved his command, he's kept his velocity gains, which I think went back down over the course of the year, which was really upsetting. And
he did get injured and never pitched again.
Right. He's got, his secondaries are working. If all that clicks for him, then like maybe he's like a June and onwards guy with an injury. But I don't think either of them is on the opening day roster right now.
I could see Dunn in the bullpen. I think Sheffield is going to AAA. Unless they're just desperate to give him another shot. Unless he's gone back to the four-seamer.
I said this last year. Justice Sheffield, like his stuff does not play up in the bullpen. And I agree. I think if he goes back to the four-seamer, which is basically a sinker, I think it gives more space between, his slider and his fastball, and he can kind of get back to that. But he and John Truppen did note that I think maybe he was coming off of injury or something like that. But I really just don't think that he's going to see much of an uptick in velo, maybe like 1. But even then, what's he throwing? 93?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe he can spam his slider, but it wasn't even good last year. Dunn is more interesting to me. I mean, he can't command his pitches, but he can throw hard, and he has a really interesting curveball.
Right.
I kind of think if he did something with that slider, maybe turn it into more of a cutter, and because his curveball and slider are really similar pitches in terms of movement, like overall movement. If he does that, he's kind of interesting in the bullpen, but Sheffield is not to me.
Who was the third guy
Just
you
not.
mentioned? Brash.
Matt Brash. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because they
I'm
could stick
so
him in
intrigued.
Tacoma as a starter too. Like if he's going to be in the bullpen, he's probably going to break camp with the team. But realistically, they could throw him in Tacoma and give him a little while as a starter. It's not out of the question.
I think either way, like no matter what they choose his role to be, I think he starts in the big leagues.
I'm
'Cause
supportive of it.
I think he's kind of proven everything in the minors.
He's already on the 40-man roster too, right? Because he got called up
they
last
called
year.
him up at the end of the year. The only scenario in which I see him in AAA is if they decide that they're definitely going to try him as a starter, and if they and this would be a good problem, but if they have like
Mhm.
really good rotation depth because they made a bunch of acquisitions and none of them get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I
we know they're
still
going
think
back
they're
to a
going to sign
5-man.
Tyler Anderson. For the record, I still think that's in the books.
Wow.
Yeah.
Y'all want to hear something? Justin Dunn has 4 pitches. In terms of location plus, 3 of them are at least 100. One of them is well below. What pitch do you think is well below?
The changeup.
Curve.
Fastball.
Oh wow.
Actually, I'm not surprised now you say that.
Yeah. He
Oh,
can't
that's
locate
right.
the fastball.
Yeah, I have
mean,
very good memory of that.
24% CSW. Yeah, he just can't locate it. And in terms of stuff, it's not good. So yeah, I mean, if you go to the bullpen and you get that uptick in velocity, you're throwing. He was setting 95, so let's say you're throwing 97. That helps the fastball play up. It doesn't help the location, but I think he just needs a cue. I think if you're going to the bullpen, it doesn't, like right now, you can't just be like, yo, throw your fastball like in the, well, maybe you could just let it rip. The thing is, it's not a Paul Sewald fastball. It's not here it is, like try to do something with it. It's a mediocre pitch. So if you do get that velo, it gets him closer to, a good fastball, and he's got a pretty crazy curveball. It's like, I think he gets 6 inches of added horizontal movement, which is a lot. That's like a lot of non-Magnus movement added. I think you turn him into a pretty good reliever.
Would a proxy for him as a reliever be something like Castillo, where he has below average control, but he makes up for it with plus velocity and throwing up in the zone, and getting Ks that way and punching out the secondaries? Like that's kind of an ideal situation if he was to be in the bullpen. And even then, I don't know if he has the command to pull that off in the first place.
I'm trying to think of a comp. I mean, Castillo is kind of the way he is because he has stuff that just kind of moves a lot, and he just throws it in the zone. He people say this a lot, but like he really, I don't think knows where it's going a lot of the time. Dunn can't really do the same because that fastball in the zone is not going to be a ground ball. It's going to be a home run. So I think in like a similar way, but also different.
Worse. Definitely worse.
Yeah. But this is really interesting to me. This is an article right here.
I did just think about the Mariners' probable rotation for next year and got very optimistic because they've got Ray, Gilbert, Flexen, Marco, and then they already said pre-lockout they're looking for a number 2 starter to add to that group. So if they got Luis Castillo or Pablo Lopez or something, that's a really good 5. And someone's going to get hurt, and so they probably will need Matt Brash to start.
Mm-hmm.
Because they said they're ditching the 6-man. So, there will be room for Kirby and Brash inevitably because injuries do happen. You never make it through even the first month without one. But
Mm-hmm.
that would be like a really good 5, I think. Depending on who that number 2 is. But if it's, if it's second starter caliber, then I trust that it would be someone good.
I don't think they fill that hole with somebody second starter caliber. Like I said, I think that person is Tyler Anderson. Just having looked over the free agency list of starting pitchers, he seems like the only, like if they're not going to spend money on Carlos Rodon, he's the only other person that makes a great deal of sense to me.
Well, they go by trade probably.
Yeah, it could be. I've sort of been dreaming recently based on Ryan Divish's wild speculation that the Mariners could sign both Story and Bryant. And so in my head, the Mariners signed Story, Bryant, and finish it off with Tyler Anderson and Seiya Suzuki, and that team competes for the playoffs.
When did he say that?
Uh,
So
last week, right? He did an
Yeah.
article
Really?
about it. Yeah.
he said that he's hearing that it's like not likely, but it's entirely in the realm of possibility. They signed 2 out of 3 of Story, Bryant, and Suzuki.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, sort of.
Wow.
To caveat that, he said they're in on Suzuki, and the word is they're trying to sign both Story and Bryant, and it's likely they get 2 of the 3 total. But it is, I
Okay.
think what they're doing is they're hedging their bets that they only get one
Wow.
of Story or Bryant, but they're probably negotiating with both of them, as they should. That's what they get paid to do. But yeah, because like Story at second base, and then because the pitch for the Ryan Divish article, and if you heard about it but didn't read it, you probably heard it was, the Mariners would trade Adam Frazier, and I was thinking, no, you wouldn't. You'd have Adam Frazier as like a really, really excellent utility guy, like he's supposed to be in the first place, and not a starting second baseman, and everyone
well,
wins. So
I think it depends on what you're trading Adam Frazier for. Like, if you're just trading him to get rid of him, that's bad. But maybe you could like get something somewhat useful. Like, I think well, this wouldn't happen, but I was like daydreaming the other day. I was like, what would it take for the Mariners to get Gavin Lux? Probably more than Adam Frazier. But
That'd
yeah,
be sick.
that would be so great.
I mean, he also
let's
hasn't been very good, but
Well, that's why
we
you
would
go
like to
get
take
him.
a chance on him though. Like he's a
Yeah,
really
he's
interesting
still like
prospect. So
23 years old or something like that, and he
I
was
think
like the
he's
number 2
24, and
prospect.
this will be his 25 season. But yeah.
Right, and he was the number 2
Yeah.
prospect in baseball like 2 years ago.
fair enough. I'll take it
Speaking of
back.
the number 2 prospect in baseball, shall we segue to one Jared Kellnick's defense? And I guess technically Julio's number 2 prospect in baseball right now, but we remember
It's okay.
last year.
I'll allow it.
So the article is how far is Jared Kellnick from being an average defensive center fielder? And I will pitch it over to Mikey, but I will say the very short answer to the summary of this is not far, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I didn't even really read that article. I just kind of looked at the methodology. That I looked at the end. That was the takeaway.
What's
The
that?
takeaway is that there are a couple of plays that he misplayed. If you were to run it back and realign him a little bit differently, he's basically right around league average, in that he compares similarly to other players who are around league average. And so the expectation that he is below average as a center fielder is probably overstating it. It's not, keep in mind, this is not an endorsement of him being a plus center fielder or outfielder, period. It is just saying that he is probably closer to roughly average or slightly below average, a tick below, than anything else. But he was bad
Yeah,
last, for the record.
and I've been, kind of pounding the table. Just really been pounding the table. His defensive metrics, they're horrible in center field. If you go on Fangraphs, almost 700 innings in center field, negative 16 DRS, which is pretty much just from range, and negative 7.6 UZR, which is almost exclusively from range. The nice thing about outs above average is it is just a range metric. It's just looking at, balls in play based on, the different factors, like how hard it was hit and how long it took to land, where their starting point was. it gives players a percentage, or at least like StatCast metrics in general. It says this is the percentage that they had to catch it, and this is what their actual percentage was. In 238 attempts in center field, his success rate was 85%. His estimated success rate was 85%. That does not speak to a fielder who is a god-awful center fielder, because a negative 16 DRS is a god-awful center fielder. His outs above average on the year, I guess for center field, because that's the most relevant, it's negative 0.1 over 238 attempts. And someone did note that these numbers, in terms of how they calculate everything, they're not normalized or adjusted for position. But I still think that he is much, much, much closer to being an average center fielder than these, DRS and UZR suggest, because their bias is that they don't take into account starting position, which is very dumb. So it's purely zoning. They're basically saying, a ball is hit here. He has this likelihood of catching it. Like he should have caught it. He didn't catch it. But if you're not adjusting, if teams are positioning their players poorly, they're going to look very bad by DRS and UZR, and very good or very average by outs above average. So like Kellnick is like 22nd percentile in outs above average, but I think part of that is that he's a center fielder. So I don't think he's a center fielder. I think his future's in left field, and I think that's fine. But I think you have to give him time to adjust. Especially because he's struggled as a hitter, but also, he's pretty average when it comes to sprint speed and average when it comes to jump. So he's not someone that you want necessarily in center field anyhow, unless you're really trying to get a 130 WRC plus into the lineup.
This does kind of pour cold water on the whole like Jim Edmonds, he's Jim Edmonds comp that we kept hearing.
Sure does.
Because he's not. Jim Edmonds is like a 70 grade center fielder at worst.
Yeah, Kellnick ain't. I think his I don't really actually know about his arm. I think the grade was okay, but it's definitely not like Edmonds or Rick Ankiel.
To your point about positioning, we had talked on the Lookout Landing podcast about this a fair amount last year, but Kate's theory is that they played him too shallow most of the time, and that his over-the-head reads are not as good as his reads when he's coming in on the ball, which realistically, you can say that about probably most outfielders, that they're better